Commander Rail Voss had seen better days. Unfortunately, today wasn't one of them. As he floated in the murky depths of Europa's oceans, he couldn't help but think that whoever named this ice-covered hellhole after a moon had a twisted sense of humor. The research dome vibrated under the pressure of the water around it, like an overworked heart struggling against cardiac arrest. Another day in paradise, Voss muttered, adjusting his suit's interface. The thing was as temperamental as a teenager. All systems functional, it droned, as if daring him to disagree. "Oh, shut up," he shot back. It didn't, which was typical. Machines were about as obedient as politicians. Voss drifted toward the central console, where a hologram of the research dome displayed their meager territory. Not much to look at, just a cluster of metal, glass, and desperation. His team of psychic soldiers buzzed around like bees in a failing hive, each trying to make sense of the Galactic Council's latest stunt. Sanctions. Because starving Earth's last hope for survival was apparently on trend this season. Lieutenant Marla Dreyfus was the first to notice him. She always did, sharp as a razor and twice as likely to cut you. "Got any good news, Commander, or we still knee-deep in cosmic crap?" Voss smirked. "Depends. You believe in miracles." "Not since my last date," Marla shot back, her eyes still glued to her monitors. She was their tech wizard, the one who made sure they didn't all drown or worse, get bored. Across the room, Sergeant Jax the Hammer Hartley looked up from his weapon maintenance, which was slightly more intense than a religious ritual. "If the Council wants us dead, they could at least send an asteroid. Maybe it would be less boring." "You wish," Voss said, shaking his head. "I hear they're reserving those for the politicians back home." The joke didn't land as well as he'd hoped, but then humor was hard to sell when everyone's life depended on a failing oxygen filter. It was always the little things that got you. He turned to the hologram, gesturing as if it might suddenly reveal something useful. "Word from above is the Council's cutting our supply lines. Apparently, Earth's running out of patience and we're the lucky bastards who get to feel the consequences." "Yeah, lucky isn't the word I'd use," Marla said. "Starved, suffocated, and sent to hell might be a start." "Look on the bright side," Jax added, always the optimist. "At least they haven't sent down a team to shoot us yet." "You're assuming they'll bother," Voss replied. "Why waste bullets when they can just wait for our brains to explode from lack of oxygen?" Marla snorted, an unladylike sound that suited the situation. "I'd like to see them try. We're psychics, remember?" "Right, because telekinesis is going to help us find food when the rations run dry," Jax said, shaking his head. "Tuna's got iron," Marla shot back. "Who needs rations when you've got sarcasm?" Voss allowed himself a chuckle, though his eyes stayed serious. Gallows humor was a survival tactic out here. "We make this work," he said, his tone firm. "We have to. Earth needs what we're doing down here." Marla rolled her eyes. "Yeah, because drowning in Europa's ocean is exactly what I signed up for when I thought saving the world sounded cool." "Don't worry," Jax said, feigning a shrug. "If we die, at least we'll have a new monument named after us. The idiots who tried." Voss tapped a button on the console, and the hologram zoomed in on a section of the dome that flickered ominously. "This," he said, pointing. "This is what's going to save us or kill us. If we can boost its output, maybe reroute some power, we'll have a chance." "And if we can't?" Marla asked, eyebrows arched. "Then make sure your wills are updated," Voss replied. "I'm not sharing my collection of antique whiskey glasses with anyone else." Jax laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that defied their situation. "Traitors' posthumous regrets." Voss turned away from the console and faced his team. Their eyes, sharp and ready, held onto the last shreds of determination. "We're not dead yet," he said, voice steady. "Let's keep it that way, shall we?" Marla snorted, a sound halfway between disbelief and determination. "Couldn't die now, could we? I've got a date with the maintenance bots later." She waved a hand at the flickering console as if shooing away an annoying fly. "Not letting this hunk of junk ruin my plans." The intercom buzzed, a voice crackling with the distinct sound of desperation and bad news. "Commander, we're detecting movement outside the dome. Might be the Council's idea of a friendly visit." Voss's grin faded. "Friendly visits usually don't come with torpedoes. Everyone suit up. Time for a little meet and greet." "Great," Marla muttered, pushing her chair back. "Just what I needed today, a reason to test if psychic powers work on bureaucrats." Jack stood, cracking his knuckles. "If they don't, maybe a good old-fashioned punch will." The team scrambled into action, donning suits that had seen better days. Duct tape and hope held them together, which was more than could be said for some of the squad. Voss led the way to the airlock, the rhythmic pounding of their boots echoing down the steel corridors. "Remember," he said, voice calm in the face of chaos, "we're professionals, act like it." "And here I was planning on mooning them," Marla quipped, sealing her helmet. Jack snorted. "Might give them a reason to leave." As the airlock cycled, Voss took a deep breath, the weight of their mission settling across his shoulders like an old, uncomfortable friend. "Ready? As ready as I'll ever be to face my impending doom," Marla replied. "It's not doom," Voss corrected as the outer door opened with a hiss, the icy water rushing in like an eager killer. "It's opportunity. Opportunity to die," Jax added, already stepping into the frigid embrace of Europa's dark ocean. Voss followed, the cold biting through his suit, a reminder that warmth was a luxury they couldn't afford. The dome loomed behind them, a fragile sanctuary against an indifferent universe. The dark expanse of Europa's ocean stretched out in every direction, a vast nothingness threatening to swallow them whole. It wasn't paranoia if the universe really was out to get you after all. Their helmets buzzed with static, and then came Marla's voice. "Commander, I've got a reading. 3 contacts, closing fast." Voss squinted through the murky water, trying to spot their impending guests. "Friendly or unfriendly?" "I'm going with unfriendly," Marla replied. "Because optimism is overrated." "Agreed," Jax chimed in. "I see them. 3 council drones, armed and probably not here to throw us a parade." "You mean they're not bringing cake?" Marla quipped. "I'd settle for a sandwich," Jax muttered. Voss steeled himself. "All right, let's give them a warm welcome." "I'm thinking psychic mind blast and a side of laser fire." They spread out, forming a loose triangle as the drones approached, their lights cutting through the dark like angry stars. Voss focused, feeling the familiar hum of psychic energy pooling at the base of his skull. "Ready? Now," he barked, unleashing the energy in a focused burst. The water around them shivered, distorting the light as the blast hit the first drone, sending it spiraling off course. Jax followed up with a volley of laser fire that stitched glowing lines across the darkness, puncturing the second drone. It spun away, trailing smoke and sparks like a mini firework in the depths. Marla raised a hand, fingers splayed as she concentrated. The last drone shuddered, caught in her psychic grip like a fly in amber. "Gotcha," she said, sweat beading on her forehead. Voss moved in, delivering a precise shot that shattered the drone's control unit. It floated, lifeless and defeated, testament to their refusal to surrender. "Well, that was fun," Jax said, holstering his weapon. "Define fun," Marla replied, shaking her head. "Because if that's fun, I'd hate to see boring." "Good job," Voss said, breathing heavily. "Let's get back inside before anyone else gets the bright idea to come calling." They turned back, the dome a beacon in the gloom. As they cycled through the airlock, Voss couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Council wouldn't give up. They never did. Marla removed her helmet, shaking out her hair. "Well, Commander, what's next?" "Survive," Voss replied, his voice grim but steady. "And maybe, just possibly, win," Jax chuckled. "Optimist," Voss shrugged. "I call it a plan. If the universe had a say in matters, it might have disagreed. But for now, they were alive, and that was enough. The war with the Council was far from over, and the stakes were higher than Europa's icy cliffs." Voss glanced at his team, their faces lined with fatigue but still holding that spark of defiance. They were all that stood between Earth's hope and the Council's indifference. "Let's get to work," he said, and they did, diving headfirst into the chaos with nothing but grit and gallows humor to light the way. The smell of burning circuits and stress-induced sweat filled the air in the cramped control room of the research dome. Commander Rail Voss leaned against the console, rubbing his temples as if that would magically summon a genius plan. The Galactic Council had decided to cut off communication, which wasn't exactly the kind of power move he appreciated. More like a swift kick to the shin while you're down. Not a fan. "All right, team," Voss said, voice heavy with the weight of impending doom. "The Council's upping their game. Word is they plan to cut our communication lines with Earth." "Fantastic," Marla Dreyfus chimed in without looking up from her console. "As if being stranded in Europa's icy hell wasn't enough, now we don't even get to bitch about it to anyone." Sergeant Jax Hartley slammed a panel shut and wiped his hands on his jumpsuit. "Guess they're tired of hearing us complain." "Some people can't handle constructive criticism. Or any criticism," Voss added, shaking his head. "We're flying blind soon, folks. Ideas." Marla finally looked up, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "Short of learning to talk to fish, we're screwed. Unless—" A voice cut through the static air, smooth and tinged with a hint of mischief. "Unless you know someone who can make miracles happen with wires." Enter Celine Core, the engineer who could probably fix the universe with a roll of duct tape and a soldering iron. She stepped in, a coil of cable slung over her shoulder like a bandolier. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her expression was one of someone who'd seen all this before and couldn't help but find it amusing. "Celine," Voss nodded in greeting. "Got any good news or just here to tell us how much deeper the hole is?" "A bit of both," she replied, moving to a console that looked like it had been through a few too many bad days. "The Council's calm blackout isn't as airtight as they think. I might have stumbled onto a loophole." Jax's eyebrows shot up. "Is this the part where we all get our hopes up and then get disappointed?" "Depends," Celine smirked. "How much hope are we putting on a scale of 1 to we're definitely going to die?" "Somewhere comfortably pessimistic," Marla said, leaning back in her chair. "Tell us about this miracle loophole of yours." Celine tapped a few keys, bringing up a fuzzy display that did nothing to inspire confidence. "They're blocking traditional signals, but there's an old relay satellite, thought to be decommissioned, that might still have a heartbeat. It's a long shot, but we could piggyback a signal through it." "Could," Voss echoed, catching the weight in her voice. "Or will." "Could," Celine shrugged. "I'm not a magician, just an engineer who likes a challenge." "In that case," Jax said, crossing his arms, "consider us all adequately challenged." Voss sighed, though there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, the kind of hope you nurture when you're halfway through a bottle of cheap whiskey. "All right, Celine, you've got our attention. What do you need from us?" Celine swung around, her smile more confident than any of them felt. "Time, patience, and a hell of a lot of luck. Oh, and maybe a few prayers if you're into that sort of thing." "Prayers," Marla snorted. "Last I checked, the heavens weren't listening." "True," Celine replied, "but it gives you something to do while everything else goes to shit." Marla laughed, the kind of laugh that was half amusement, half resignation. "All right, engineer. Let's see what you can do." As Celine dove into her work, fingers dancing across the controls like a concert pianist, the rest of the team watched, a mixture of skepticism and hope battling in their minds. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in their situation, something was a luxury. The dome's ambient hum grew louder as systems were rerouted, power redirected in a desperate bid to make contact with the forgotten satellite. The air was thick with tension and unspoken fears, a tangible force pressing down on them. "Here goes nothing," Celine murmured, flipping the final switch. The screen flickered, wavered, then stabilized, showing a weak but clear connection. "We're through." "For now." Voss leaned in, scrutinizing the readings. "That's our miracle. Now how long can we keep it?" Celine shrugged, her face a mask of attempted optimism. "Long as it takes. I've got duct tape." Jax chuckled, the sound tired but genuine. "Duct tape, the universal savior." "True believer," Celine shot back, pulling up the communications interface. "Let's get in touch with Earth before the universe decides we're not allowed nice things." With a few deft keystrokes, she opened a channel, static hissing like a snake disturbed in its lair. Earth Command, this is Europa Research. Do you copy? The static lingered, an oppressive blanket threatening to smother their fragile connection. Then, miraculously, a voice crackled through, distorted but unmistakably human. Europa Research, this is Earth Command. We read you. Barely. What's your status? Voss exchanged a look with Marla, who nodded, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. Earth Command, he said, leaning into the microphone. We've got a situation here. Galactic Council's cut our lines, probably trying to starve us out. We're improvising. Understood, Commander, the voice replied, strained with static and the weight of distant wariness. We're aware, working on options from our end. Options, huh? Jax muttered. Sounds like they're about as screwed as we are. Voss ignored him, focusing on the conversation. Any chance of supplies? We're running low on oxygen and morale. There was a pause, the kind that spoke volumes without speaking at all. We'll see what we can do, Voss, but it's tight everywhere. Great, Marla muttered. Tight is code for we're all about to suffocate. Copy that, Voss said into the mic, masking his frustration. Keep us posted. We'll keep this line open as long as we can. Good luck, Europa, Earth Command said. You're not alone. The connection severed with a final burst of static, leaving the room in echoing silence. It was a lie, of course. You're not alone was the sort of platitude people spat out when they didn't have real solutions, but it was something. Celine leaned back, wiping sweat from her brow. Well, that wasn't a complete disaster. Could have been worse, Jax added. Could have been another drone with torpedoes. Or worse, Marla chimed in. Another motivational speech from Earth Command. Voss chuckled, running a hand through his hair. Keep that line alive as long as possible, Celine. We're going to need all the help we can get. Celine nodded, moving to reinforce the connection, her presence a calming force amid the chaos. I'll do my best, Commander. Just keep the drones off my back. No promises, Voss said, his tone lighter but still tinged with the weight of their situation. But I'll see what I can do. The room settled into a tense yet oddly comforting routine. Marla monitored the systems, Jax continued his ritualistic weapon checks, and Voss kept a wary eye on the hologram of the dome, its sections flickering like a dying star. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, their little corner of the universe, defiant in the face of everything. With the Council breathing down their necks and Earth support slipping away, they had nothing but each other and the grim determination to survive. So, Marla said, breaking the silence, anyone got a good joke? Something to distract us from impending doom? I've got one, Jax replied, smirking. Why did the Galactic Council cross the galaxy? Voss raised an eyebrow. To get to the other side. Nope, Jax said, grinning. To remind us how much they suck. Laughter filled the cramped space, a brief respite from the shadows gathering outside. The joke was terrible, but it didn't matter. It was enough to lighten the air, even if just a little. As the laughter faded, Voss looked around at his team, a ragtag crew of misfits and survivors bound together by sheer force of will. They were the ones who refused to bow, to break, to let the universe have its way. All right, he said, his voice carrying a hint of resolve. Let's get back to work. We've got a galaxy to piss off. Marla saluted with mock seriousness. Yes, sir. Pissing off galaxies is my specialty. Mine too, Jax added, checking his weapon one last time. Celine smiled, tapping away at her console. Then it sounds like we've got a plan. With renewed focus, they set to work, a small beacon of resistance in the vast, uncaring dark. The universe might not care about them, but they cared about each other, and sometimes that was enough. For the moment, at least, they had hope and a signal to Earth, however faint, and that was more than they'd had yesterday. Voss took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift just a fraction. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they were still in the game. They might be down, but as long as they were breathing, they'd keep fighting. Because it was what they did, even when the odds were never in their favor. To the end of the universe, Voss muttered under his breath, a private toast to a future that wasn't guaranteed but was worth fighting for. The others didn't hear, but in the quiet determination of their actions, they echoed his sentiment. Together, they faced the abyss, armed only with gallows humor, duct tape, and the infallible human spirit. And for now, that was enough. In the cramped confines of the Europa Research Dome's control room, the air was about as pleasant as the inside of a derelict space dumpster. Commander Rael Voss, perpetually teetering between exasperation and resignation, watched Celine Core fiddle with the comms system like it owed her money. Anything? Voss asked, his voice a gravelly mix of hope and skepticism. If I had a credit every time you asked that, Celine shot back without looking up, I wouldn't be stuck here with you lot. Jax Hartley, who was busy dismantling a plasma rifle with the care one usually reserves for defusing bombs, snorted. You'd miss us, Core. We're delightful company. Like a root canal, Marla Dreyfus chimed in from the corner, eyes glued to the flickering monitors. Any luck with that ancient satellite? Celine straightened, cracking her knuckles. It's like trying to communicate with a toaster using Morse code, but yeah, I'm getting there. Great, Voss said, rubbing his temples. All we need now is for the council to realize we're cheating and send a welcoming committee. You know, the kind with guns. Relax, Commander, Jax said, reassembling his rifle. If they show up, we can always offer them Marla's cooking as a peace offering. Marla raised an eyebrow but didn't bother with a retort. Sarcasm was the primary language of Europa, and Jax was fluent. Meanwhile, in the depths of the dome, Dax Kyle sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor of his quarters, eyes closed. Being the resident psychic soldier was about as glamorous as it sounded. Which was to say, not at all. His visions were more of a curse than a gift, especially the ones that crept up on him like unwanted relatives at a family gathering. The latest vision had been unsettling. He saw flashes of betrayal, the kind that had the potential to leave them all gasping for breath in Europa's unforgiving oceans. Figures moved like shadows, indistinct but somehow familiar. Trust was as fragile as a soap bubble in a hurricane. Dax, a voice crackled through his comms unit, piercing the ominous fog of his thoughts. It was Voss. We need you in the control room. Bring your psychic party tricks. Dax opened his eyes, already regretting whatever involvement he was about to have. On my way. When he arrived, the tension in the room was palpable, like waiting for the verdict in a bad courtroom drama. Nice of you to join us, Nostradamus. Jax greeted him, not looking up from his weapon. Any fortune cookie wisdom? Yeah, Dax replied dryly, avoid seafood. Voss cut in, his expression one of weary leadership. We might have found a way to communicate with Earth, but we need to ensure we're not being compromised. Dax, anything from your visions we should know? Dax hesitated, the weight of his premonitions sitting like a bad meal. There's something. I can't pin it down, but someone's not playing for our team. Great, Marla muttered. As if being stranded wasn't enough, we've got a Judas in our midst. Could be nothing, Dax said, though he didn't believe it for a second. Could also lead to us suffocating in this metal coffin. Optimism, Jax noted, not your strong suit. Nope, that's your department, Dax replied, and you're failing miserably. Celine, who'd been silent until now, spun in her chair. Well, I've got good news and bad news. Let's get the bad news out of the way, Voss sighed, leaning against a console that looked like it had been salvaged from a junkyard. The comm signal's not as stable as I hoped, Celine said. It's like holding a conversation through a soup can telephone. And it's warm soup. And the good news? Marla asked, although her tone implied she didn't expect much. I've hidden our signal trace for now, Celine continued, but if someone's really trying to screw us, they'll find it eventually. So, Jax said, shouldering his rifle, we're on a timer. Seems like it, Voss replied, his eyes narrowing as if he could will the hologram of the dome into giving them good news. It didn't. The air in the room was thick with unspoken fears and barely contained frustration, the kind that could turn even the sanest mind into a breeding ground for paranoia. Trust was in short supply, and suspicion was the local currency. All right, Voss said, clapping his hands together with mock enthusiasm. We need to keep this line to Earth open as long as possible. Celine, make sure no one traces it. Marla, I need you to keep our systems running. Jax, don't shoot anyone unless they shoot first. Sure thing, boss, Jax said with a grin that suggested he'd been considering it. And Dax, Voss added, his tone softening slightly, if you get any more of those visions, let us know. Even if it's bad news. Dax nodded, though his mind was already a whirlpool of doubt and foreboding. It was like knowing you were about to get hit by a train, but having no idea from which direction. As they dispersed to their respective tasks, Voss lingered by the console, the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders like an invisible shroud. Being the leader meant making decisions that could get them all killed, but hesitating was just as dangerous. Rail, Celine said quietly, her back to the rest of the room as she adjusted the comms frequency. You think we'll make it through this? Voss considered the question, the honest answer like a bitter pill he couldn't quite swallow. I think we don't have a choice but to try. Celine gave him a small, tight-lipped smile, one that carried more weight than any words could. Guess I'll keep duct tape on standby then. Best decision all day, Voss replied, returning her smile with one of his own. It was a faint thing, flickering like the signal they were pinning their hopes on. While the team settled into a rhythm of controlled chaos, Dax took his leave, heading back toward his quarters. The corridors were dimly lit, the flickering lights casting shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent. Europa had a way of making even the most advanced technology feel like it was conspiring against you. His mind was a carousel of images, spinning faster than he could make sense of them. Faces, familiar yet twisted in ways he couldn't comprehend, taunted him from the recesses of his mind. His instincts screamed at him, a cacophony of warnings that refused to quiet. It was in these moments, when the psychic noise was almost unbearable, that Dax questioned every choice he'd ever made. Was it worth it, being the canary in this cosmic coal mine? Probably not, but quitting wasn't an option unless you were into sudden decompression. Back in the control room, Celine meticulously worked her magic on the comms system, her fingers dancing over the controls with the precision of a surgeon. Each adjustment was crucial, a tiny lifeline in the grand scheme of their survival. Marla monitored the dome systems, occasionally muttering under her breath. Her patience was wearing thinner than a politician's promises, but she kept at it, fueled by equal parts caffeine and spite. Jax, for his part, ran another check on their weaponry. It was a ritual he found oddly soothing, like a soldier polishing his armor before battle. Each click and clack was a reminder of their precarious existence, and the potential for things to go sideways at a moment's notice. Voss watched over them all, the weight of leadership a constant companion. He'd long since accepted the uncertainty of their situation, but acceptance didn't make it any easier. He felt like a father watching over a family that might never make it back home. "Commander," Celine called out, her tone urgent but not yet panicked. "I've got a blip on the radar." "Define blip," Voss replied, moving to stand behind her. Celine pointed to a small, pulsing dot on the screen. "Could be a ship. Might be one of ours, but we're not scheduled for a drop." Voss squinted at the screen, his mind racing through possibilities. Could be Council, could be pirates, could be some poor sod who's just as lost as we are. Or, Marla added, it could be an asteroid about to give us a very personal visit. "Always so positive," Jax teased, peering over Celine's shoulder. "Comes with the territory," Marla shot back. "Can we identify it?" Voss asked, a frown etching itself across his face. "Not yet," Celine admitted, frustration coloring her tone. "It's keeping its distance, but if it gets closer, we'll know more. Until then," Voss said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, "let's assume the worst and hope for the best. Keep an eye on it." With a nod, Celine returned to her work, trying to coax more information from the stubborn systems. The room fell into a tense silence, each member of the team lost in their thoughts, the implications of the unknown threat hanging over them like a guillotine. In his quarters, Dax sat on his bunk, staring at the wall as if it might provide answers. His mind was a fractured mirror, reflecting pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite fit together. The sense of betrayal loomed large, a shadow that refused to be dispelled by logic or reason. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered to himself, willing the images to coalesce into something coherent. "Give me something to work with." But the visions remained elusive, as if mocking his inability to grasp their meaning. It was maddening, this dance with the unknown, and it left him feeling more isolated than ever. Back in the control room, the team continued their watch, the blip a persistent reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond their fragile sanctuary. It was as if the universe had decided they weren't suffering enough and had thrown another wrench into their precarious situation. "So," Jack said, breaking the silence with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, "any bets on what's gonna kill us first?" "Lack of air, rogue ship, or each other, depends," Marla replied, not missing a beat. "How long until you drive me insane?" "Longer than you think," Jax grinned. "Focus, people," Voss said, though there was a hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. "We've got enough problems without adding murder to the list." The banter was a thin veil over their collective anxiety, but it served its purpose, keeping them grounded in the here and now. They were a motley crew, each with their own quirks and flaws, yet somehow they made it work. As the Iors dragged on, the blip remained a mystery, steadfastly refusing to reveal its intentions. It was a waiting game, the kind that frayed nerves and tested resolve, but they had little choice but to endure. For Dax, the visions continued to haunt him, a relentless tide of uncertainty and fear. Every time he closed his eyes, the images assaulted him, a flood of foreboding that threatened to drown him in doubt. And yet, amidst the chaos and confusion, there was a small, stubborn part of him that refused to give in. It was the same part that had driven him to join this accursed mission in the first place, the indomitable will that refused to be broken. In the end, that was what set them apart, what kept them fighting when all seemed lost. They were survivors, each in their own way, and together they would face whatever the universe threw at them. Even if it meant enduring the unknown, grappling with betrayal, and navigating the treacherous waters of their own minds. They were human, after all, and if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was defying the odds. So they waited, a motley crew on a distant moon, clinging to hope in the face of despair. Because no matter how bleak the situation, they still had each other, and sometimes that was enough. Voss was about to settle into another round of wrist-cracking boredom when the comms crackled, not with Celine's dulcet tones, but with the kind of static that made your teeth itch. Then came a voice, tinny and self-important like a politician caught in a wind tunnel. "This is Inspection Unit Theta 9 of the Galactic Council. Prepare for immediate boarding inspection. Non-compliance will be considered an act of aggression." Voss sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Fantastic, just what we needed. The babysitters are here." Marla shot him a look that was half amusement, half incredulity. "You think they brought snacks? They better have," Jax grumbled, still tinkering with his rifle. "Last thing I need is some suit telling me how to do my job without at least a protein bar as compensation." Voss glanced at Dax, who was now standing with a peculiar stillness that suggested his mind was off somewhere no one else could follow. "Dax, anything we need to worry about?" The psychic soldier blinked, snapping back to reality. "Just a feeling we're about to step into a pile of cosmic crap." "Great," Voss muttered. "Let's make sure we do it with style then." Celine didn't look up from her console. "I've hidden what I can, but if they poke around too much they might find something. Unsanctioned. Which is everything we're doing," Marla added helpfully. "Yeah, thanks for that," Voss replied, rolling his eyes. "Okay, everyone, play nice. Remember, they're here to make sure we're not doing anything naughty like trying not to die without their permission." Jax chuckled darkly, setting the rifle aside with a careful precision. "So we're screwed then." "Only if we let him see the real us," Voss said, trying to muster some semblance of optimism. It tasted bitter, like a lie told to a child about the tooth fairy. The inspection unit's ship docked with the dome in a hiss of compressed air and mechanical clamps. Voss and his crew lined up in the cramped main corridor, each wearing expressions that ranged from bored to dangerously amused. The inspection team strode in 3 of them, helmeted and carrying the kind of authority that made you want to punch them just to see what they'd do. The leader, a tall, angular man with a voice like gravel being poured over more gravel, stepped forward. "Commander Rail Voss," he said, as if it were an accusation. "We're here to ensure compliance with Galactic Council regulations." "Welcome," Voss replied, offering a smile that was about as warm as deep space. "You want the tour before or after we show you where the bodies are buried?" The man blinked, clearly not used to humor. "Let's keep this professional, Commander." "Wouldn't dream of it any other way," Voss said, gesturing for them to follow. "This way to our sparklingly compliant facilities." As they started the tour, Marla leaned in to whisper to Voss, "If they find our little secret, we're toast." "Then let's make sure they don't," Voss replied, voice low. "Celine, any chance you can give them a technical distraction? If by distraction you mean crash the environmental controls, then sure," Celine said, fingers flying over her console. "Wouldn't be a party without you," Voss quipped as the inspection team examined the equipment with the enthusiasm of tax auditors. As if on cue, the lights flickered, and the air systems made a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a death rattle. The lead inspector frowned, tapping at his datapad with irritation. "Is there a problem, Commander?" "Just the usual," Voss said breezily. "This place is held together by hope and duct tape. You know how it is." The inspectors exchanged glances but said nothing. As they moved on, Celine discreetly powered down the more sensitive equipment, her movements smooth as silk. Jax tailed the group, staying just close enough to overhear while idly twirling a wrench as if it were a baton. "You know," he remarked to no one in particular, "I hear the Council's inspection team gets hazard pay for dealing with us." The lead inspector didn't rise to the bait, though his stiff posture suggested he wanted to. Instead, they continued their thorough, if tedious, examination, occasionally pausing to make notations on their pads. Meanwhile, Dax lingered at the edge of the group, eyes narrowing as he tuned his senses to the inspectors. Not an easy task, considering the static buzz of their thoughts was like trying to hear a whisper through a hurricane. Images flickered before Dax's mind's eye, brief glimpses of what the inspectors were truly after, a sense of something hidden, something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. He shivered as the images shifted, his head throbbing with the effort of trying to decipher them. "We've got a problem," Dax whispered to Marla as they moved through the corridors. "They're looking for something specific. I can't tell what, but they're not just here for the usual checkup." "Figures," Marla replied, her tone resigned. "Any idea what we should do? Keep them busy. Make sure they don't get a chance to dig too deep." Back in the control room, Celine continued her digital sleight of hand, keeping the inspector's attention flitting from one harmless system to another. Voss kept up the chatter, a steady stream of half-truths and misdirections designed to keep the inspectors guessing. It was a delicate dance, one wrong step away from disaster, but they were used to that. It was practically their job description. "So what's this?" the lead inspector asked, pointing to a console that looked more jury-rigged than functional. "That," Voss said, "is our state-of-the-art coffee maker. Works about as well as you'd expect." The inspector wasn't amused, but he seemed to accept the explanation, moving on to the next item on his list. Around them, the dome creaked and groaned, as if it too were in on the joke. Europa's icy grip held them all in a precarious balance, one that could shatter with the slightest misstep. As the inspection dragged on, Marla found herself standing next to one of the inspectors, a woman with sharp features and a gaze that could cut glass. "So tell me," Marla said, unable to resist, "do you actually enjoy this job, or is it just something to do between bouts of existential dread?" The woman arched an eyebrow. "I'm here because I believe in the Council's mission." "And what mission is that?" "Making sure we're all equally miserable, if necessary," the woman replied, deadpan. Marla chuckled. "Good to know there's job security in bureaucracy." The woman didn't respond, but Marla could see a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps the smallest hint of shared humor, or maybe just the realization that they were all cogs in a vast, uncaring machine. As the inspection neared its end, Voss could feel the tension in the room tightening like a drum. It was the kind of moment that could go either way, like watching a glass teeter on the edge of a table, just waiting for the inevitable crash. "We'll need to take a look at your communication logs," the lead inspector said suddenly, a statement that hung in the air like a threat. Celine shot Voss a look that was equal parts warning and resignation. They both knew the logs were the weak point in their ruse, the one thing they couldn't completely hide. But Voss wasn't about to let that show. Instead, he plastered on another smile, giving a casual shrug. "Sure thing. Though I should warn you it's mostly boring reports and bad jokes." The inspector nodded as if he expected no less. They moved to the comms console, Celine stepping aside with a polite smile that said she was just waiting for them to mess up. As they scrutinized the logs, Dax felt the tension in the room spike, a sharp, electric buzz that had nothing to do with the failing lights or the dome's ancient wiring. His instincts screamed at him, a primal warning that something was about to go very wrong. But before he could act, before any of them could so much as twitch, an alarm blared shrill and piercing. The inspectors froze, eyes darting around the room as if expecting the walls to collapse. "What's that?" one of the inspectors demanded, voice raised over the din. Voss feigned nonchalance, though his heart pounded in his chest. "Oh, don't worry. That's just our way of saying thanks for visiting, please leave now." The lead inspector glared at him, clearly not in the mood for jokes. "We need to investigate this." "Of course," Voss said, gesturing expansively. "Be my guest. Just don't blame us if you end up locked in the broom closet." With the inspectors momentarily distracted, Celine leaned toward Voss, her voice low. "I didn't trigger that." "Something's off. Tell me something I don't know," Voss replied. He could feel the situation slipping through his fingers, the delicate balance they'd maintained for so long teetering on the edge of collapse. The inspectors were moving now, splitting up to cover more ground, their professionalism masking any hint of panic. Voss knew they were running out of time and options. "All right, people," he said under his breath, addressing his crew. "Time to get creative. Celine, keep the systems busy. Marla, see if you can divert their attention. Jax, try not to hit anyone unless it's absolutely necessary." "And me?" Dax asked, though he already knew the answer. "Keep doing what you do best, Dax," Voss said. "See if you can figure out what's really going on here." The team sprang into action, each member playing their part in the unfolding drama. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with the inspection team closing in and the crew scrambling to stay one step ahead. As Voss watched, he couldn't help but marvel at the irony of it all. Here they were, a ragtag group of survivors on a frozen moon, locked in a battle of wits with the very people who were supposed to be keeping them safe. But then, that was the way of the universe, wasn't it? Chaos and order, trust and betrayal, all swirling together in an endless dance of contradictions. And if there was one thing Voss knew for certain, it was that they were damn good dancers. As the inspectors continued their search, Voss felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the realization that they might just pull this off after all. Because if there was one thing he'd learned during his time in the void, it was that they were best when their backs were against the wall, and right now they were as cornered as they could possibly get. "So," Jax said with a grin as he passed Voss in the corridor, "you thinking what I'm thinking?" "If by thinking you mean praying for a miracle, then yeah," Voss replied, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "Guess we better start praying then," Jax said, handing Voss a spare comms unit before moving on. Voss watched him go, the weight of command heavier than ever. But even as the odds stacked against them, he felt a glimmer of something unexpected, hope. Because they were more than just a team. They were family, and family didn't go down without a fight. As the inspection reached its climax, the dome seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation. Voss knew they were close, so close to pulling off the impossible. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Then finally, with a click and a whir, the inspection team's datapads beeped in unison, signaling the end of their investigation. The alarm had stopped, the air was still, and all eyes turned to the lead inspector. "What's the verdict?" Voss asked, keeping his tone light, casual. The inspector hesitated, then nodded, his expression unreadable. "Everything seems to be in order, Commander. You're clear." A collective sigh of relief swept through the control room, the tension ebbing like a receding tide. Voss met the eyes of his crew, each one reflecting the shared triumph of their narrow escape. "Thank you for your cooperation," the lead inspector said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely happy about it. "Any time," Voss replied, resisting the urge to add a sarcastic quip about how they hoped to never see them again. As the inspection team made their exit, Voss allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd managed to outwit the Council's enforcers, at least for today. And as they watched the inspector's ship detach and disappear into the void, the crew of the Europa research dome leaned back, savoring their victory. "Well," Celine said, breaking the silence, "that was fun." The muffled thud of boots echoed through the cramped corridors of the Europa research dome, a sound that always meant trouble. Voss knew the drill. Trouble was practically his middle name, sandwiched between bad decisions and sarcasm. "Well, crap," Voss muttered, his voice barely rising above the hum of the dome's life support systems as he watched the inspector's ship vanish into the void from the control room window. "I was hoping for a quiet week." The inspection had ended, but the unease lingered, like a bad smell you can't quite locate. The team was scattered around the control room, each absorbing the reprieve in their own way. Marla was skimming through system checks like she was flipping through a particularly dull novel, while Celine fiddled with the comms, her expression a mix of relief and suspicion. Jax was in his corner, tinkering with the plasma rifle like it might start spewing poetry if he twisted the wrong screw. Dax stood silently, his face a mask of concentration as his mind swam through visions he couldn't quite grasp. Voss turned to his crew, about to offer some half-hearted comfort, when the world went to hell in a handbasket. Alarms shrieked louder than a banshee with a megaphone, the lights flickering like they were auditioning for a horror movie. Marla shot up, eyes wide with panic. "What the hell now?" Celine's fingers danced over the console. "The Council ship tripped our hidden alarms before leaving. We're exposed." "What do you mean exposed?" Jax asked, his voice as tense as the grip on his rifle. "As in naked and flailing on a winter beach exposed," Celine deadpanned, her sarcasm cutting through the chaos like a hot knife through butter. Before Voss could respond, the control room door crashed open, revealing a squad of grim-faced Galactic Council enforcers, weapons drawn and ready. Their arrival was as unwelcome as a fart in a spacesuit. "Commander Rail Voss," barked the leader, a stocky man whose expression suggested he regularly flossed with barbed wire, "you're coming with us." Voss raised his hands in mock surrender, a crooked grin pasted on his face. "Can't say I'm thrilled, but I've always wanted a personal tour of a Galactic Council brig." The enforcers swarmed the room, the air crackling with tension as they rounded up the crew. Voss was cuffed and hauled away, the weight of his situation settling in like a lead blanket. As Voss was dragged into the corridor, he caught sight of Dax. The psychic soldier's eyes were glazed, his mind elsewhere, probably dancing through another vision of doom and gloom. Voss gave him a subtle nod, a silent order to do what he did best, survive and somehow make this right. The rest of the crew was left behind, stunned and leaderless as their commander was marched away into the bowels of the dome. Celine turned to Marla, her voice low. "What now?" Marla shook her head, a tight smile on her lips. "We improvise. It's what we do best, right?" Celine nodded, though her expression was less than convinced. She turned back to her console, fingers moving like a pianist playing a dirge. Jax watched Voss disappear with a frown, then turned to the others. "Guess it's time to make some noise. Just make sure it's the right kind of noise," Marla replied, her tone equal parts sarcasm and exasperation. Last thing we need is a bigger mess. Meanwhile, in a forgotten nook of the dome, Dax sat cross-legged, eyes closed, mind flitting through the echoes of his premonitions. He saw glimpses of the future, fragments of chaos and fragile hope. He snapped back to reality with a jolt, the urgency of the situation sinking in. They needed a plan, and fast. He rose, determination etched on his face. Back in the control room, Marla was running scenarios through her mind, each one more desperate than the last. "All right, team, we need to get Voss back." "Suggestions," Jack snorted, leaning against the wall. "We could always storm the gates with our good looks and charm." Celine rolled her eyes. "We're doomed." Marla considered their options, or rather the lack thereof. "Celine, can you hack into the council's comms, figure out where they're holding Voss?" "I can try," Celine replied, already elbow-deep in digital tomfoolery. "Give me a few minutes." As Celine worked her magic, Jax disassembled and reassembled his rifle, a comforting ritual amidst the chaos. "Got any of those visions handy, Dax? Could use a bit of clairvoyance right about now." Dax, who had found his way back to the group, shook his head. "Nothing useful, just shadows. Whatever's coming, it's big." "Fantastic," Marla muttered. "Just what we needed, more vagueness." Celine's voice cut through the tension. "Got it. They've got Voss in the central hold, but we're gonna need a distraction to get there." Jax grinned, tapping his rifle. "I'm good at distractions." "No shooting unless absolutely necessary," Marla warned. "We need stealth, not carnage." "Party pooper," Jax retorted, though there was no real heat in his words. The plan, such as it was, began to form. Marla would lead the charge, Celine would run interference, and Dax would try to predict any hiccups in real time. Jax, of course, would do what he did best, look menacing and make noise. "All right, let's move," Marla ordered, determination in her voice. The team slipped out of the control room, a ragtag group of rebels against a seemingly omnipotent foe. They moved with a mix of caution and bravado, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the dome, their hearts pounding in unison. As they neared the central hold, a sense of foreboding hung in the air, a reminder of the stakes they faced. The odds were against them, but they had no choice. "Ready?" Marla asked, her voice a hushed whisper. Jax nodded, his grip steady on the rifle. "Born ready." Celine and Dax exchanged a look, a silent agreement to stick together come what may. Marla took a deep breath, then nodded. "Let's do this." They burst into the central hold, a blur of motion and determination. The enforcers were caught off guard, their surprise almost comical as weapons were raised and voices shouted commands. Jax provided cover, laying down a barrage of non-lethal fire that sent the enforcers diving for cover. Meanwhile, Celine hacked the security system, locking down the exits and scrambling the cameras. Amidst the chaos, Dax moved like a ghost, his instincts guiding him through the melee. He reached the cell where Voss was held, the door sealed shut with a heavy-duty lock. "Little help here," Dax called out, his voice strained. Marla dashed over, tools in hand, working quickly to bypass the lock. Sweat beaded on her brow as she focused, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, with a satisfying click, the door swung open, revealing Voss, disheveled but defiant. He grinned as he stepped out, clapping Dax on the shoulder. "Nice timing." "Wouldn't miss it," Dax replied, a hint of relief in his tone. With Voss free, they regrouped, the odds still stacked against them, but their spirits buoyed by the small victory. "All right, let's get the hell out of here," Voss ordered, leading the way back through the chaos. As they retraced their steps, Jax kept the enforcers at bay, his rifle a near-constant presence. They moved with purpose, a well-oiled machine amidst the turmoil. Reaching the exit, they paused, taking a moment to catch their breath. "That went well," Celine said, sarcasm lacing her voice. "Considering the alternatives, yeah," Voss replied, his tone light despite the gravity of their situation. "Where to now, fearless leader?" Marla asked, eyeing Voss. He considered their options, or lack thereof, before making the only decision that made sense. "We keep fighting. If the Council wants a war, they've got one." As they slipped back into the shadows, Voss couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but not out of the fight, because at the end of the day they were more than just a team. They were family. And family, as any fool knew, was worth fighting for. The control room smelled like old coffee and desperation, a combination that seemed to linger no matter how many times Marla threatened the universe with a cleanup. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the monitors, each flickering display as unhelpful as the last. The Galactic Council enforcers had left a mess, and it was up to them to sweep up. Celine was hunched over the console, her fingers moving with the urgency of someone who just realized they were out of bathroom tissue. "I've got some good news and some bad news," she said, her voice the auditory equivalent of an eye roll. "Hit me with the bad news first," Marla replied. "No point in delaying the inevitable slap in the face." "The Council's got more ships in orbit," Celine reported, her tone flat. "They're really rolling out the welcome mat." Jax let out a low whistle as he checked his rifle, his favorite pastime these days. "And the good news, we get a free buffet with our impending doom," Celine smirked, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "I've found a way to tap into their comms. With a bit of luck, we might eavesdrop on their dinner plans." "Nice work," Marla said, her voice brimming with grudging admiration. "Let's hope their plans involve screwing up on a monumental scale." Meanwhile, Dax sat cross-legged in a corner, his eyes closed, orbs of concentration against the chaos. He was the team's resident psychic, though he often looked more like a guy who'd just seen a particularly traumatic encounter with a public restroom. His visions were usually as clear as mud, but every so often they threw him a bone. "Anything on your mind, Dax?" Marla asked, her tone teasing but hopeful. "Just shadows and static," Dax replied, his voice distant. "Though I keep seeing a light, it could mean something." "Thanks for the in-depth analysis," Jax quipped, not missing a beat. "Next time try channeling a weather report. Less ominous, more helpful." Dax opened his eyes, suddenly sharp, the hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. "There's a surge of energy below us. Something powerful, could be useful." Celine perked up, her fingers still dancing over the console. "Energy, like a power source," Dax nodded. "Could be, or a massive frying pan. Either way, it might help us turn the tide." Marla sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'll take anything over nothing. We need to rally the troops, get Voss back. And maybe, just maybe, not die in the process." "No guarantees," Jax said with a shrug, "but I've got a few distractions up my sleeve." "Let's hope those distractions don't involve blowing us all to hell," Celine muttered, half joking, half serious. The plan was as makeshift as a duct-tape spacesuit, but they didn't have the luxury of time. They moved out, a motley crew of rebels with a death wish, or at the very least, a strong inclination toward chaos. Kor and Dax led the charge, the two of them a walking contradiction of quiet intensity and bubbling madness. They moved through the dimly lit corridors, past pipes that groaned like an old man getting out of bed and walls that seemed to close in with every step. "Stay sharp," Kor whispered, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "We're in the lion's den now. More like the house cat's litter box," Jax murmured, his rifle at the ready. "But point taken." Ahead, the corridor opened up into a wider space, the central hub of the dome, or as Dax had dubbed it, the frying pan. "You sure about this?" Marla asked, her eyes flicking to Dax. He shrugged, the gesture as non-committal as his psychic predictions. "As sure as I'll ever be." "Fantastic," Jax deadpanned. "I'll start penning my will." They crept forward, the air thick with tension and the acrid scent of impending violence. The hub was cavernous, a space designed for function over form, with machinery and conduits crisscrossing like overcooked spaghetti. In the center, a glowing core pulsed with a rhythmic hum, the source of the energy Dax had sensed. Marla squinted at the core, curiosity piqued. "That's our power source." "Looks like it," Dax confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Think it'll help?" Kor asked, her eyes scanning for threats. "It's either our salvation or the galaxy's biggest nightlight," Celine said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "We're about to find out." As they approached the core, the air shimmered, a ripple of unseen forces. Dax paused, his expression shifting from wary to intrigued. Feel that? Feels like the universe's worst static cling, Jax grumbled, his skin prickling. Dax ignored him, stepping closer to the core. His eyes widened, the light reflecting in his irises like twin stars. There's something here. Something alive. Marla exchanged a glance with Core. Alive? You're saying this thing's sentient? Dax nodded, his voice filled with awe. It's aware and it wants to help. How do you know that? Jax asked, skepticism thick in his voice. I just do, Dax replied, his confidence growing. We need to let it in. Let it connect. Celine's brow furrowed, her fingers poised over her console. You're talking about interfacing with an unknown entity. That's insane. Insane's our specialty, Marla said, lips twitching into a wry smile. Dax, can you do it? Dax nodded, stepping closer, his focus unwavering. I'll try. The moment stretched, each second heavy with the potential for disaster. Then Dax reached out, his hand hovering over the core. A spark leaped, bridging the gap, and for a heartbeat everything was still. Then the world exploded into motion. The core flared, light cascading across the room, illuminating every shadow. Dax staggered back, eyes wide, breath stolen by the force of the connection. But his expression, one of triumph, told its own story. Got it, he gasped, the words tinged with disbelief. It's with us. With us? Jax echoed, incredulous. What the hell does that mean? It means, Dax replied, a grin breaking through his usual seriousness, we've got a new ally. The core pulsed, and suddenly the dome system surged to life. Screens flickered with new data, the hum of machinery rising in a harmonious crescendo. It was as if the entire facility had awoken, each part suddenly aware of its purpose. Marla's eyes widened as she surveyed the transformation. What did you do, Dax? Tapped into its potential, he replied, the grin still in place. It can manipulate energy systems, it's giving us control. Control over what? Celine asked, skepticism warring with hope. Everything, Dax said simply, including the council's systems. Marla didn't need any more encouragement. All right, let's use this. Celine starts scrambling their comms. Jax, prepare for a counterattack. If the council wants a fight, we give them one. Music to my ears, Jax replied, taking up a defensive position. Core glanced at Dax, her expression a mix of admiration and disbelief. You really pulled it off, he shrugged, a touch of humility in his voice. Couldn't have done it without all of you. Save the love fest for later, Marla cut in, her tone brisk. We've got work to do. With newfound confidence they set to work, a flurry of motion and determination. They tapped into the dome systems, redirecting power, scrambling signals, and setting traps for any unwelcome visitors. Celine's fingers flew over her console, her focus unbreakable. I've got their comms in a knot. It'll take them hours to untangle this mess. Marla nodded, satisfaction lighting her features. Good, that'll buy us time. Outside the hub, the sound of distant footsteps echoed, a reminder that they were far from safe. Jax adjusted his grip on the rifle, his posture relaxed but ready. Looks like we've got company, he said, a hint of anticipation in his voice. Let him come, Marla replied, her eyes fierce. We're ready. The enforcers arrived in a flurry of black uniforms and shouted orders, weapons raised and eyes alert. But the team was prepared, their positions strategically chosen, their resolve unshaken. Jax opened fire, his shots precise and controlled, forcing the enforcers to take cover. Meanwhile, Core and Dax coordinated their efforts, utilizing the Core's energy manipulations to misdirect and disorient their foes. Celine's voice cut through the chaos, steady and clear. Systems are holding. We've got control of the blast doors. Good. Seal them in, Marla ordered, her mind already spinning with contingency plans. The enforcers, realizing they were trapped, fought with desperate ferocity. But they were no match for the team, who worked with the precision of a well-oiled machine, or at least, a machine that had been given a good kick to get it going. With the enforcers neutralized, the team regrouped, breathless but victorious. The Core's light pulsed in time with their racing hearts, a silent testament to their newfound alliance. That went better than expected, Cor remarked, her eyes scanning the room for any lingering threats. Yeah, we might actually live through this, Jax quipped, disbelief mingling with relief. Marla let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. We've got a shot, thanks to Dax. Dax shrugged, the corners of his lips curling up. Just doing my part. Well, your part just saved our asses, Celine said, her voice warm with gratitude. Voss, who had been observing from the sidelines, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. You all did good, got us out of one hell of a bind. Marla shot him a look, her eyes challenging. And now, Voss said, his voice resolute, we take the fight to them. The team nodded, a shared understanding passing between them. They were outnumbered, their odds long, but they had something the council didn't, each other and a newfound ally in the Corps. As they prepared for the next stage of their plan, the air hummed with the promise of what was to come. They were ready to fight, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way, because in the end they were more than just a team. They were a family, flawed and fierce, and if the council wanted a war, they'd damn well get one. The control room was tense, like a fuse waiting for a match. Commander Rael Voss surveyed the ragtag group gathered around him. They were battered, bruised, and more than a little insane if you asked him. But they were the best chance Earth had, and that was saying something considering their collective mental state was only slightly more stable than a badly wired toaster. All right, listen up, Voss began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had nothing left to lose. We've got control over the dome systems, thanks to Dax's little light show back there. Now we're going to use it to give the Galactic Council a very unpleasant wake-up call. Unpleasant like a butt full of space fleas, Jax the Hammer Hartley asked, his rifle resting comfortably in his hands. He looked entirely too pleased at the prospect of causing havoc. Precisely, Voss smirked, a glint of mischief in his eyes. We hit the Council's control center, force them to lift those sanctions, and maybe, just maybe, we save what's left of humanity. Marla Dreyfus, ever the tech wizard, was already tapping at her console, fingers dancing across the keys with a speed that would make a pianist weep. I've got their systems in sight. We can mess with their power grid, scramble communications, even make their coffee machines spew tar. You know, the essentials, messing with their caffeine supply. That's downright evil, Celine Cor quipped, her voice tinged with dark amusement. But hey, I'm on board. Nothing sacred in war, Voss replied dryly. Not even decent coffee. Dax Kyle, the resident psychic with eyes that seemed to see more than they should, nodded silently. His earlier triumph with the Corps had given him a rare moment of confidence. He was like a cat that had finally caught that damned laser dot, and he wasn't going to let it go. All right, team, Voss said, clapping his hands together. Let's make this a day the Council won't forget. They moved through the dome with a purpose, the corridors barely wide enough for their collective determination. The icy walls seemed to hum in anticipation, as if the structure itself was rooting for them. Or maybe it was just the recycled air playing tricks on their minds. As they approached the exit leading to the Council's control center, Cor glanced at Voss. What's the plan once we're in? We get in, cause chaos, and get out, Voss replied. Simple. Simple, Marla echoed, rolling her eyes. Like defusing a bomb with a hammer is simple. Jax grinned, hefting his rifle. Hey, that sounds like my kind of job. Let's avoid getting blown up today if possible, Celine suggested. I've got plans later that involve not being a pile of ash. Noted, Voss said, his tone dry as the Martian desert. The door to the control center loomed ahead, a steel behemoth that barred their way. Celine took point, her fingers working magic on the console beside it. Give me a sec. And bingo! The door slid open with a reluctant groan, revealing a room bustling with council enforcers and techs oblivious to the chaos about to be unleashed upon them. Time to crash the party, Voss declared, stepping forward with the confidence of a man who'd long since stopped caring for subtlety. The team burst into the room, weapons raised and ready. Jax fired off a few warning shots, the plasma bolts sizzling through the air and sending the council techs scrambling for cover. "Hello, lovely people," Jax called out, his voice dripping with mock cheer. "We're here for the apocalypse. Hope you don't mind." Panic erupted like a firework in a church. Enforcers shouted, hands flying to weapons, but the team was already in motion. Marla and Celine flanked the sides, tapping into the control systems with the ease of seasoned saboteurs. The lights flickered, consoles sparked, and the once orderly room descended into a cacophony of panic and confusion. "Systems are going haywire," Marla shouted over the din, her fingers a blur on the console. "I've got control of the mainframe. We can shut down their defenses." "Do it," Voss barked, taking cover behind a console as plasma bolts zipped past his head. Dax stood in the center of the chaos, eyes closed, his mind reaching out to the core's energy. The room seemed to vibrate with his presence, as if he was a conduit for the very spirit of rebellion. The enforcers, realizing their systems were being compromised, doubled their efforts to regain control. But the team was relentless, every move choreographed chaos, every action a step closer to victory. "Blast doors are sealed," Celine announced, her voice laced with triumph. "They're locked in with us." "Good," Voss said, taking aim and firing at the enforcers attempting to flank them. "Let's give them a proper Europa welcome." Jax was in his element, his rifle dancing in his hands as he provided covering fire. "Welcome to the dome, assholes." Core, meanwhile, was a blur of motion, ducking and weaving through the chaos, her own weapons dispatching enforcers with ease. She was a force of nature, and woe betide anyone who got in her way. As the battle raged, Voss noticed a group of enforcers attempting to bypass the lockdown, their hands flying over a console in the corner. With a nod to Marla, he pointed them out. "On it," Marla replied, sending a surge through the system that fried the console and sent the enforcers sprawling. "Nice," Voss commented, grinning despite the madness surrounding him. "All in a day's work," Marla replied, a hint of pride in her voice. The tide was turning, the enforcers' efforts growing more desperate by the second. The team, however, fought with the ferocity of people who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Dax, still connected to the core, suddenly gasped, his eyes snapping open. "The Council's relenting. They're lifting the sanctions." "Seriously?" Celine asked, disbelief mingled with hope. "Dead serious," Dax confirmed, a smile breaking through his usually somber expression. Jax let out a whoop of victory, his voice echoing over the din. "Looks like we've done the impossible." The remaining enforcers, realizing defeat was imminent, began to retreat, their once confident strides reduced to hurried scrambles. "Let them go," Voss ordered, lowering his weapon. "We've made our point." The team regrouped, breathless and exhilarated, the control center now a testament to their struggle and success. The air was thick with the smell of burnt circuits and the buzz of triumph. Voss looked around at his team, a motley crew of misfits who'd somehow become heroes. "We did it. The sanctions are lifted." Marla let out a shaky laugh, her relief palpable. "I can't believe it." "Believe it," Core replied, her voice firm. "We fought and we won." Jax nodded, his expression a mix of disbelief and pride. "Damn right we did." As they stood amidst the wreckage of their victory, the reality of their achievement began to sink in. They'd faced impossible odds, taken on the might of the Galactic Council, and come out on top. Voss, feeling every ache and bruise, glanced at his team with a wry smile. "Let's get back to the dome, regroup. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. And maybe celebrate," Celine suggested, her eyes bright with the prospect. "Definitely," Voss agreed. "We've earned it." As they made their way back through the corridors, the weight of their success settled over them like a comfortable old coat. They were weary, sure, but they were victorious. They'd given Earth a fighting chance, and in the end that was worth every risk they'd taken. "So," Jax said, breaking the silence with a grin, "when's the parade in our honor?" Marla snorted, shaking her head. "Don't hold your breath. We're the heroes nobody asked for." "Yeah, but we're the heroes they got," Voss said, his voice filled with a mix of pride and exhaustion. The team nodded, a shared understanding between them. They were a family forged in the fires of desperation and defiance, and they just pulled off the impossible. As they reached the dome, the core's glow welcoming them back, Voss couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they'd taken the first step, and sometimes that was enough. "All right, folks," Voss said, his tone brisk but warm. "Let's get to work." Because if there was one thing they were good at, it was defying the odds, and maybe, just maybe, saving the world. The control room of the Europa Research Dome was once again a cacophony of beeping machines and flickering lights, but this time, victory buzzed in the air like static electricity. The team was back, bruised but not beaten, and riding a high that came from sticking it to the Galactic Council. Voss leaned against a console, looking like a man who'd just pulled a fast one and lived to tell the tale. His people, his mismatched band of renegades, were busy tending to wounds and cracking wise, because what else are you going to do when you've just told the universe to go screw itself? "Well, that was easier than expected," Jack said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he cleaned his plasma rifle. "I was half expecting a medal ceremony with trumpets and confetti by now," Celine snorted, giving her hair a quick shake that sent droplets of sweat flying. "Confetti's banned in space. Clogs the air filters. But hey, maybe the council will send us a nice thank you card." Marla, ever the pragmatist in a sea of wise asses, threw a mock salute. "To the heroes of Europa, may your coffee always be lukewarm and your oxygen slightly stale. Don't forget, may your paychecks be eternally lost in the mail," Dax added with a rare grin. He'd come out of the psychic trance looking like he'd just napped through a thunderstorm. Voss pushed off the console, brushing imaginary dust from his uniform. "All right, enough with the self-congratulations. We've got a planet to get back on its feet, and believe me, the council's not going to roll over and play dead just because we scared them a bit. Yeah, they'll be back, and probably with more bureaucrats and red tape than an interstellar divorce court," Jax quipped, slamming a new energy cell into his rifle. "Nothing like a good old-fashioned intergalactic lawsuit to dampen the mood," Marla muttered as she fiddled with the control systems, ensuring they remained one step ahead of the council's inevitable retaliation. Celine turned from her station, an impish look in her eyes. "So, what's the plan, boss? Aside from not getting blasted into space dust, I mean." Voss scratched at the stubble on his chin, a thoughtful look on his face. "We need to secure Earth's position, make sure the council knows we're not just some backwater rock they can kick around anymore. Like a cosmic we told you so," Dax offered, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Exactly," Voss confirmed. "We'll need to keep control of the dome, ensure they don't try anything funny." Celine raised an eyebrow. "And by funny, you mean sabotage, assassinations, or maybe a giant space laser, all of the above," Voss replied dryly. "Let's just say I'm not trusting those council bastards to throw us a welcome-home parade." The team nodded, the weight of their task settling back over them like a familiar, if slightly itchy, coat. They might have won this battle, but the war for Earth's future was far from over. "So," Marla said, tapping a few commands into her console, "what's the first step in turning Earth into a galactic powerhouse?" "First, we need to secure resources," Voss said. "Earth's been living in the Council's shadow for too long. We'll need allies, technology, and a hell of a PR campaign to wash away our reputation as the galaxy's favorite punching bag," Celine interjected. Voss gave a half-smile. "Something like that. We've got the tech and the know-how. What we need are contacts outside the Council's thumb." Dax, leaning back in his chair, piped up. "I might have a few acquaintances who owe me favors. Dangerous sort, but good in a pinch." "Great," Voss said, clapping his hands together. "Get in touch with them. The more pressure we put on the Council, the better our chances of keeping Earth safe." Jax, ever the skeptic, crossed his arms. "And if they decide they'd rather turn us into space dust than deal with us, then we remind them why poking a hornet's nest full of pissed-off hornets is a bad idea," Voss said, his tone just shy of deadly earnest. "Sounds like a blast," Jax replied, unable to resist a grin. Literally, Marla leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms behind her head. Well, time to get to work then. We've got an entire planet to save, and I'm running low on caffeine. Don't worry, Celine said, flashing a wicked grin. I'm sure the council's got some lovely coffee they'll be willing to donate after today's little performance. The team got to work, each member slipping into their roles with a kind of worn-out efficiency that only comes from having been through the ringer together. As they worked, the banter continued to flow, a defense mechanism against the oppressive weight of their mission. So Voss, Celine said, her fingers dancing over the comms console, what's the first thing you'll do if we pull this off? Retire to a beach on some distant planet and leave you maniacs to fend for yourselves. Not a chance, Voss replied. Besides, I hear retirement's for people who like shuffleboard and early bedtimes. Jax laughed, a short bark of amusement. Yeah, I can't see you sitting in a rocking chair, sipping tea. Damn right, Voss said. I'm more of a whiskey and late-night scheming kind of guy. Figures, Marla said, not looking up from her work. You always did have a thing for the dramatic. Comes with the territory, Voss replied, a hint of pride in his voice. As the hours ticked by, the team's jokes became fewer, and the reality of their situation began to weigh heavily once more. The silence was comforting, though, a shared understanding that they were in this together, come what may. Finally, as the dome systems hummed along, Voss called a halt. All right, folks, let's take a breather. We're no good to anyone if we're running on fumes. Jax leaned back, stretching his arms above his head with a satisfied groan. Damn, I knew I liked you for a reason, boss. It's my charming personality, right? Voss said, deadpan. More like your ability to let us nap, Celine quipped, rubbing her eyes. The team settled into a comfortable silence, the kind only found among people who've fought and bled together. They were far from out of the woods, but for the first time it felt like they weren't just running from the council. They were running towards something worth fighting for. After a while, Dax spoke up, his voice thoughtful. You think Earth will ever be free of the council? Voss considered the question for a moment. Maybe. Maybe not, but we've got to try. Otherwise, what's the point? Guess so, Dax said, nodding slowly. Feels weird, though. Like we're just starting this fight all over again. Marla sighed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Story of our lives, right? Just when you think you're out, someone pulls you right back in. But hey, at least it's never boring, Celine said, her tone bright with irony. Boring's overrated, Jax replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who's seen a bit more than he'd like. Voss watched his team, a group of mismatched souls bound by a shared cause. They were tired, yes, but they were also a force to be reckoned with. The council might have underestimated them once, but they'd make damn sure it didn't happen again. All right, Voss said, breaking the silence. Time to get back at it. We've got a planet to save and not a lot of time to do it. The team rose as one, the moment of respite over. They'd taken a breath, gathered their strength, and now it was time to dive back into the fray. As they returned to their stations, the dome seemed to buzz with renewed energy. They might have been a ragtag group of rebels, but they were also the spearhead of Earth's rebellion. It was a heavy burden, sure, but they wouldn't have it any other way. Voss took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the control room. Let's show the galaxy what Earth can do. And with that, the team plunged back into their work, each member driven by the same unyielding resolve. The road ahead was long and the fight far from over, but they had hope, and sometimes hope was enough to light the way. As they worked, the banter picked up again, defying the weight of their mission with humor and camaraderie. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that laughter, dark, irreverent, and defiant, was the best weapon they had against the cold indifference of the universe. And so, with sarcasm as their shield and determination as their sword, the team pressed on, ready to face whatever came next. Because if there was one thing they were good at, it was defying the odds, and maybe, just maybe, saving the world.